There's an old Transylvanian legend about a count who fell in love with his own reflection in a maiden's eyes. Each night he would visit her chamber, bringing jewels, poems, promises of eternity. And each morning he would leave a little paler, a little weaker, while she bloomed like a midnight rose fed on blood. The villagers whispered that she was a vampire, but the truth was far more ordinary and far more terrible. She was simply a woman who understood the mathematics of desire. Schopenhauer knew this arithmetic well. In the humid corners of Frankfurt coffee houses, bent over manuscripts that smelled of tobacco and disappointment, he scratched out equations that no mathematician would recognize. Man pursues plus woman receives equals man diminishes. It's not malice, he insisted, wiping ink from his fingers. It's nature's cruel bookkeeping. Picture this. A man in pursuit is like a moth circling a flame, each orbit stealing a fragment of his substance. His thoughts narrow to a singular point. Her smile, her scent, the particular way she tilts her head when pretending not to notice him. Meanwhile, she sits at the center of this devotional spiral, accumulating power like a spider accumulating silk. Recent studies from behavioral psychologists in Stockholm, those cold observers of warm madness, confirm what Schopenhauer suspected. Men in active pursuit show decreased cognitive function, impaired decision-making, and, here's the delicious irony, reduced testosterone levels. The hunter becomes the hunted by his own hormones. But here's where the velvet curtain parts to reveal something grotesque. Women don't steal this power. Men hemorrhage it willingly, eagerly, like medieval flagellants convinced their suffering serves some higher purpose. Watch a man in love. Really watch him. See how he reshapes himself, discards old friends like worn shoes, abandons passions that once defined him. He becomes a sculptor destroying his own statue to please an audience of one. I once knew a violinist, brilliant, they said, destined for Vienna's golden halls. Then came Elena with her crooked smile and her way of listening that made him feel like the only musician who'd ever lived. Within a year, his Stradivarius gathered dust while he gathered roses. Within 2, he was teaching scales to beginners, all his symphonies unwritten, dissolved in the acid of her occasional approval. Elena. She opened an art gallery with his family money and took a younger lover who painted her as Aphrodite. The biological cruelty runs deeper. Nature designed women to be selective, to gather resources, to build nests from the scattered offerings of multiple suitors. A woman receiving attention from 5 men gains the power of 5. A man pursuing 5 women divides his power by 5. It's thermodynamics applied to the heart. Energy dispersed versus energy concentrated. In the Bhagavata Purana, there's a tale of King Pururavas who fell in love with the celestial nymph Urvashi. She agreed to stay with him under certain conditions. Strange rules about never seeing her naked, about keeping 2 rams always by their bed. Of course, he broke the rules. Men always do. And of course, she left him wandering the forests, mad with loss. But before she departed, she spoke a truth that echoes through millennia. You gave me your kingdom, your sanity, your very self. And what did you receive? The temporary illusion of possessing something that was never yours to own. Modern men, swiping through digital catalogs of possibility, bleeding attention and intention into the void of unresponded messages, might recognize themselves in poor Pururavas. Each, seen at 11:47 p.m., is a small death. Each crafted message left hanging in digital purgatory is a prayer to an absent God. Meanwhile, she accumulates these devotions like a dragon hoards gold, not from greed, but from the simple fact that gold flows toward those who don't chase it. Tell me, lone listener in your midnight scrolling, when did you last feel truly powerful? Was it while pursuing, yearning, crafting the perfect approach? Or was it in those rare moments when you turned away, when you chose your own work over her whims, when you remembered that you existed before her and might, just might, exist after? The vampire's kiss isn't in the taking, it's in the giving, and in the terrible realization that what you freely gave can never be reclaimed. Love's sweetest words are just negotiations in disguise. In the back alleys of 19th century Paris, where cobblestones gleamed with offal and rain, there stood a butcher's shop run by a widow named Madame Clavel. She had a peculiar practice. She would weigh her suitors' gifts on the same scale she used for meat: flowers against flanks of beef, love letters against lamb chops. "Everything has its weight," she'd say, wiping blood on her apron, "and every weight has its price." The philosophers in their ivory towers would have been horrified, but Madame Clavel understood something they pretended not to know. Every caress is a currency. Every kiss a contract written in saliva and hope. Listen closely, and you can hear it. The subtle click of the scale in every romantic gesture. He brings flowers, 2 pounds of devotion. She offers a smile, 3 ounces of possibility. He plans elaborate dates, 5 pounds of effort. She arrives fashionably late, -2 pounds. A debt he'll carry. Back and forth the scale tips, and woe to the fool who thinks love transcends this terrible mathematics. Schopenhauer, that grim accountant of the heart, put it bluntly: sexual passion is the most vehement of cravings, the desire of desires, the concentration of all our willing. But what he understood, what makes men clutch their pearls and women their purses, is that this passion flows predominantly in one direction: from the pursuer to the pursued, from the beggar to the throne. I've seen CEOs, men who command boardrooms and bend markets to their will, reduced to stammering schoolboys by a waitress's indifference. There's something alchemical in this transformation. How power accumulated over decades can evaporate in the presence of a pretty stranger who doesn't care about your portfolio. A friend of mine, a surgeon who literally holds hearts in his hands, once spent 3 months crafting the perfect message to a woman he'd met for 5 minutes at a gallery opening. 3 months. He could have learned Mandarin, written a novel, saved a dozen lives. Instead, he weighed and reweighed words like "hey" versus "hello." Each revision a gram of dignity placed on Madame Clavel's eternal scale. The research is deliciously damning. Psychologists at Yale, those architects of disillusionment, found that men in the early stages of courtship show the same neurological patterns as gambling addicts. The intermittent reinforcement: she texts back, she doesn't, she does, but it's just K, creates a dopamine loop more binding than any casino's algorithms. Women, meanwhile, show activation in brain regions associated with evaluation and decision-making. One is drowning, the other is taking notes on the quality of the performance. But here's where it gets exquisitely cruel. Both parties know the game. She knows he's performing, peacocking, inflating his feathers like some desperate bird of paradise. He knows she knows. She knows he knows she knows. And still the dance continues. This elaborate kabuki where authentic feeling is the greatest faux pas. Remember the myth of Orpheus? Everyone focuses on his tragic attempt to retrieve Eurydice from the underworld. But they forget the beginning. How he won her with his music, how every song was a payment, every melody a mortgage on his soul. And when he looked back and lost her, that wasn't love conquering doubt. That was a debtor finally checking the balance and realizing he'd given everything for something that was never guaranteed. In Tokyo's host clubs, they've stripped this dynamic to its honest bones. Men rent themselves by the hour to lonely women, providing conversation, attention, the illusion of interest. It's prostitution inverted, emotion commodified, and perhaps the most honest expression of what every Friday night dinner date truly is. A marketplace where loneliness and desire haggle over the price of temporary connection. The modern dating apps have simply digitized Madame Clavel's scale. Swipe, match, message, ghost. Each interaction precisely weighted, algorithmically sorted. Men spray their attention like machine gun fire, hoping something hits. Women curate their responses like museum directors, each reply a careful calculation of interest versus investment. The apps know what Schopenhauer knew. In the economy of desire, scarcity creates value, and abundance breeds contempt. Last week, I watched a man at a coffee shop buying a $7 latte for a woman who was clearly texting someone else. The barista, young, pierced, wise, in the way only service workers can be, caught my eye and shrugged. We both knew, $7 for the coffee, his dignity was extra. So here's my question for you, dear listener, as you sit in judgment of these transactions. What's the most expensive thing you've ever given for love? Not the dinner bills or the jewelry receipts. I mean the real currency. The dreams deferred, the friends neglected, the version of yourself you murdered and buried in the backyard of possibility. And did you ever get correct change? The moment you cage a butterfly is the moment it forgets how to fly. There's a garden in Kyoto where monks have tended the same rose bushes for 300 years. Beautiful, yes, but here's what the tourist pamphlets won't tell you. These roses have forgotten how to survive. Their thorns have softened to velvet, their roots grown shallow as puddles. Set them free in wild soil, and they'd be dead within a season, murdered by their own cultivation. This is what Kierkegaard meant when he wrote, trembling in his Copenhagen tower, that marriage is and remains the most important voyage of discovery a human being undertakes. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say without the neighbors burning his manuscripts, was that most discoveries are of continents you wish had remained unmapped. Watch what happens to lovers when they sign their names on the dotted line of forever. Something dies in that ink. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with the slow certainty of fruit rotting from the inside. The wild thing that drew them together, that electric uncertainty, that delicious terror of potential loss. It suffocates under the weight of security. I knew a couple once, artists both, who lived in delightful sin for 7 years. Their apartment was chaos, paint on the walls, wine stains on the ceiling, arguments that ended in either breakups or breathless reconciliation. She would disappear for days, following inspiration to Prague or Pittsburgh. He would lock himself in the studio, emerging only to find her gone or returned, never knowing which. They created masterpieces from this uncertainty, feeding on the constant question of whether tomorrow would find them together or apart. Then came the wedding, a beautiful affair, everyone said. Candlelight and commitment, vows written in verse. Within 6 months, they'd bought a sensible couch. Within a year, she was asking permission to visit her sister. Within 2, he was painting landscapes for hotel lobbies, and she was teaching watercolors to suburban housewives. The wild garden had been pruned into a neat hedge, and neither could remember why they'd once found chaos so intoxicating. The research is heartbreaking in its consistency. A 2024 study from the University of Amsterdam tracked cortisol and testosterone levels in men before and after marriage. The results? A 21% drop in testosterone within the first year, 34% by year 3. But here's the twist that would make Schopenhauer cackle. Women's testosterone levels remain stable or even increase slightly, as if nature itself was revealing its bias. Domestication weakens the hunter while emboldening the keeper. But it's not just hormones, it's the entire architecture of desire. Desire requires distance, mystery, the possibility of no. Marriage murders all three with the efficiency of a hired assassin. When you can have something whenever you want, you cease to want it with the same fire. When mystery is replaced by the mundane ritual of shared bathrooms and synchronized schedules, the erotic imagination withers like those Kyoto roses deprived of struggle. The ancient Sufis had a saying, "The beloved is lost the moment you believe you found her." They understood that pursuit and possession are antithetical states, that the hunter must die for the husband to be born, and with that, death goes everything that made the hunt worthwhile. Consider the praying mantis, nature's most honest newlywed. The female devours the male's head during copulation, and he continues the act, headless, driven by some primitive programming that outlasts consciousness. Is this not the perfect metaphor for what commitment does to passion? The thinking, yearning, scheming part, the head that dreams and desires, is consumed, leaving only the mechanical motions of habit. I once attended a dinner party where a man, 6 whiskeys deep, confessed that he masturbated to memories of chasing his wife more than to the reality of having her. The room fell silent, not from shock, but from recognition. Every married man there saw himself in that confession, though none would admit it. They'd all traded the electric uncertainty of "will she" for the domestic certainty of "she has to," and found the bargain left them bankrupt. Modern women understand this intuitively, which is why the smart ones maintain what I call the architecture of distance, even within commitment. Separate bedrooms, mysterious phone calls, nights out that end with vague explanations. They know what the marriage industrial complex doesn't advertise, that a captured man is a castrated man, and a castrated man is of use to no one, least of all himself. The French have a phrase, l'amour de loin, love from afar. Medieval troubadours sang of knights who loved ladies they'd never touch, whose entire identity was built on the exquisite tension of eternal approach without a rival. We mock them now, call them foolish, sexually repressed. But who was happier, the knight polishing his armor for a glimpse of his lady's handkerchief, or the husband polishing his car while his wife shops for throw pillows? Tell me, brave listener, when did you feel most alive in love? Was it in the having, or in the horrible, beautiful uncertainty of the hunt? And if you could choose, the wild garden where every day might be your last together, or the cultivated roses that will definitely die in captivity but at least die on schedule, which would you plant? Or have you already chosen, and are you now simply tending the graveyard, pretending the roses are still wild? In the Republic of Loneliness, every man is president. In the mountains of Bhutan, there's a monastery where monks take a vow not of silence, but of solitude. They believe that a man alone is a man in conversation with God, while a man in company is merely an echo of other people's thoughts. The locals whisper that these monks live to impossible ages, their faces unlined by the friction of other people's expectations, their backs unbent by the weight of performing masculinity for an audience that never stops judging. Schopenhauer would have loved those monks. "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone," he wrote, probably smiling for the first time that week. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, for it is only when he is alone that he is really free. But here's what the self-help prophets won't tell you while they're peddling their find your soulmate snake oil. Solitude isn't loneliness. Loneliness is solitude corrupted by the belief that you should be with someone else. True solitude is the recognition that you are complete in your incompleteness, whole in your hollowness, sufficient in your insufficiency. Watch a man truly alone, not scrolling through dating apps, not performing his aloneness for Instagram, but genuinely, authentically alone. Something magnificent happens. The shoulders drop. The face relaxes into expressions no one will judge. He reads books he actually wants to read, not the ones that will impress hypothetical future lovers. He eats when hungry, sleeps when tired, thinks thoughts too strange or sacred to share. He becomes, in essence, himself. I remember visiting a friend who'd been divorced for 3 years. I expected to find him diminished, maybe surrounded by pizza boxes and regret. Instead, I found him building a boat in his living room, a full-sized sailing vessel, right where the marital bed used to be. "Why?" I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked why humans need oxygen. "Because I can," he said. "Because no one's here to ask why." The statistics on male happiness post-divorce are fascinating in their contradiction. The first year is hell. Suicide rates spike. Health deteriorates. The machinery of life seems to sputter and stall. But then, around year 2, something shifts. Studies from the University of Copenhagen, those Vikings know something about surviving winter alone, show that divorced men who don't immediately remarry report higher life satisfaction by year 3 than they did while married. They rediscover hobbies abandoned at the altar, reconnect with friends excommunicated by couples culture, remember what their own laughter sounds like. But it goes deeper than boats in living rooms or reconnected friendships. In solitude, a man recovers something primordial, the ability to be useless. Yes, useless. Not a provider, not a protector, not a performer. Just a consciousness experiencing existence without the constant pressure to justify that existence to someone else. Nietzsche, mad and brilliant in his alpine isolation, understood this. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Modern men have forgotten this privilege. They've been programmed to see solitude as failure, as if a man without a woman is a king without a kingdom. But they've got it backwards. A man with a woman is a king who's abdicated, trading his sovereignty for the illusion of significance in someone else's story. Consider the Japanese term hikikomori, social recluses who withdraw entirely from society. The media paints them as pathological, broken, needing intervention. But what if they're the sane ones? What if they've simply opted out of a game where the rules guarantee loss? A 2024 study found that hikikomori, despite their isolation, showed lower cortisol levels and better cardiovascular health than their socially integrated peers. Their bodies knew what their minds had decided. Sometimes the healthiest response to a sick system is refusal. The divine comedy of it all is that women are attracted to genuinely solitary men, not lonely men. Not men pretending to be alone while desperately seeking validation, but men who've made peace with their own company. It's the ultimate paradox. The less you need them, the more they want you. But by then, if you've done solitude right, you've discovered something more valuable than attraction. Indifference to attraction. There's an old Taoist story about a master who lived alone on a mountain. A beautiful woman climbed the peak to seduce him, convinced she could break his solitude. She found him making tea, humming to himself. She performed all her arts, beauty, wit, charm, the promise of pleasure beyond imagination. He listened politely, then said, "That sounds lovely, but I'm already having tea with my favorite person, myself, perhaps another lifetime. So here's my challenge to you, digital wanderer in the midnight of your discontent. Can you spend 1 week genuinely alone? Not lonely, not waiting, not preparing for someone's arrival, just alone. No dating apps, no texting exes, no performing your solitude for social media. Just you and the terrifying, liberating recognition that you might be enough. Or does that throne look too empty to claim?" The strongest flame burns without seeking oxygen. In the ashes of Pompeii, archaeologists found a peculiar skeleton. A man, seated at a table, writing. Mount Vesuvius had erupted, the city was dying, everyone fleeing in terror. But this man sat, calm as a meditation, finishing what appears to be a love letter. The twist? The letter wasn't to a woman. It was to himself, a philosophical treatise on the nature of endings. He died not running toward or from anything, but complete in his final moment of creation. This is the last secret, the one that makes all the others irrelevant. When a man stops reaching, stops grasping, stops believing his worth lies in what he can capture or convince or copulate with, that's when he becomes genuinely dangerous. Not dangerous like a wolf hunting, but dangerous like a mountain. Immovable, indifferent, inexplicably attractive to those who once ignored him. Schopenhauer discovered this near the end, bitter and brilliant in Frankfurt, surrounded by poodles who loved him without condition or calculation. "A man shows his greatness," he wrote, "not by reaching high positions, but by treating these positions as unimportant when he has reached them." But even he didn't fully grasp the radical implication. The positions include the position of being loved, wanted, chosen. I watched this transformation in my brother. 6 feet of desperate energy, cycling through dating apps like a gambler pulling slot machine levers. Every match a possibility, every ghost a grave. He measured his days in responses, his worth in whether Sarah or Samantha or Svetlana had opened his carefully crafted message. Then his dog died, his ancient Labrador, the only creature that had ever looked at him without calculation. Something broke in him that day, or perhaps something finally healed. He deleted the apps, not dramatically, not as a statement, but the way you throw out expired milk. He started walking at dawn, not for exercise, but because dawn doesn't judge your loneliness. He learned woodworking, badly at first, fingers full of splinters, but eventually creating things that had weight, presence, purpose, beyond impressing anyone. 6 months later, at a hardware store of all places, covered in sawdust and talking to himself about wood grain, a woman approached him, not because he was performing confidence or broadcasting availability, but because he wasn't. He was just a man, complete in his incompleteness, buying sandpaper with the focus of someone who'd found something worth smoothing. The neuroscience is almost mystical. When men stop pursuing, their brains undergo a kind of rewiring. The constant cortisol bath of rejection anxiety recedes. Testosterone, no longer wasted on displays of desperate virility, stabilizes at actually healthy levels. A 2025 study from MIT called it the satisfaction paradox. Men who stop seeking satisfaction report dramatically higher satisfaction. It's as if the universe rewards those who stop begging from it. But this isn't about becoming attractive to women. That's just a side effect, like how burned forests grow back greener. This is about something far more radical. Discovering that you were always whole, that the gnawing hunger was trained, not innate, that you can choose to be full without being filled. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the known world, wrote in his private journal, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." Easy for an emperor to say? Perhaps. But he wrote it while at war, surrounded by death, his wife suspected of infidelity, his son clearly growing into a monster. He had everything and knew it meant nothing. More importantly, he knew that knowing this was everything. Modern men are starting to discover this through failure rather than philosophy. The Japanese have a term, satori, for sudden enlightenment. But there's another term, gyokusai, for the beautiful destruction that precedes rebirth. Every man ghosted into oblivion, every divorce that leaves him gasping in an empty house, every rejection that finally breaks the last thread of hope. These aren't endings, they're beginnings. The phoenix doesn't rise despite the ashes. It rises because of them, because everything false has been burned away, leaving only what cannot be destroyed. The essential self that exists beyond validation, beyond desire, beyond the endless game of pursuit and capture. I met a man last week, 47 years old, drinking coffee alone at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. He had the look, you know it if you've seen it, of someone who'd been through the fire and decided not to rebuild. "You married?" I asked, making conversation. He smiled, like Buddha might have smiled at someone asking about his palace. "I'm married to Tuesday afternoons," he said. "We're very happy together." So here's my final question, my parting gift wrapped in black ribbon. What if everything you've been taught about needing someone else is exactly backwards? What if the greatest love story you could ever write is the one where you finally stop auditioning for a role in someone else's drama and start directing your own? What if the phoenix doesn't need a mate to be complete? What if you're already flying and the weight you feel isn't loneliness? It's just the last chains of conditioning falling away. What if you stopped reaching today? What then?